Welcome back to the Driven Leadership Podcast, everybody. We are excited to be back at the roundtable, the virtual roundtable here, and we're doing. We don't do these a lot. We've only put out a couple, but they've come to be one of my favorite types of episode. We're reacting to Reddit stories and submissions. There is a whole thread on Reddit where people post their leadership questions, and some of them range to how do I be better at this to please tell me this gets better. I hate my job. So we're going to go through a few of those. We're joined by Eric and Mary today. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
Feeling good?
Yeah.
Cool.
Coming out of my turkey coma after Thanksgiving. I realize this will air somewhere down the road, but that's where we're at.
No, this one's coming out Monday. We're a little
Monday.
behind.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Turkey coma, vacation coma, bold coma. Woo.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's see how
dangerous cocktail.
And for
awake
those that
our
are
brains are.
Watching this on YouTube or whatever, this is my attempt to grow a beard. It's not
And this
working
is
very well.
Yeah, no, and this is my tan.
Oh, I was going to say, no, you
you
can't
gotta-
see your beard, Mary.
I don't have one. I better not have one.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, let's jump in. All right. So the first one comes to us from Boston Wind. And this one, the title of this one is Holding Staff Accountable. And they go through quite a bit of detail here. So I'll kind of lay out where they're at. They say, I own a restaurant, and one of the biggest issues we have with managing the staff, and this is the whole management team, they have this problem, is holding employees accountable. So they say it's not like we don't hold them accountable at all. If it's something big and easy to determine the consequences of, like if you eat off a guest's plate, they're able to swiftly take action. But it's anything.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a problem.
I'm like, that's a thing.
I don't know if
That's
that
really a
should be
thing. Okay.
Hopefully that's in the kitchen and not at their table.
Yeah, just at the table. Yeah. But they say if it's anything else is when they really fall short. So I know that having a discipline system like verbal warning, written warning, so on and so forth, can help hold employees accountable, but it's extremely difficult to execute this system due to a few factors. And they list a bunch of stuff, but mostly it's time, record keeping, follow through. Those are kind of the big ones that are like, we know this would help, but it's all these things get in the way. So they said they also struggle with the other side of accountability, which is interesting. They say when someone does things up to standard or expectations, the management team, they praise them, but that's as far as it gets, and they feel like it should be more. So in the final bit, they said they are a small family mom and pop restaurant. A big reason why they feel like they have good retention is that people want to work for them because they aren't a chain and don't treat employees like just an expendable number. And so they're asking for advice on how to maintain this type of family mom and pop atmosphere while still being able to hold their staff accountable. So there's a lot going on there, but I think we get the gist when this is a pretty big issue, pretty constant issue. So how have you guys seen this play out in the past?
So, well, Mary, do you want to go or?
No, you can go. It's just so weird because I've heard this 2 times in the last day in regards to accountability. And the feedback is like, they're so nice. Like the owners are so afraid to rock the boat.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so nice that they don't hold people accountable.
Yeah. So common thing that you're pulling up here, as Mary just pointed out, is that, and there's, I think a lot of people view accountability as a pendulum. It's like I'm too firm or I'm too loose. And there is a spectrum there that is real.
Mm-hmm.
However, accountability has less to do with how the term hold a person accountable leads us down a path that is controlling, autocratic, dictatorial. It doesn't work if you're really building a trusting environment. So they're counterproductive. So let's start. We're going to answer this specific Reddit. So this Reddit, we have a family-run business. So typically in a family-run business, the first obstacle is the people running the business are not holding each other accountable to high performance. So if your leadership team, and especially if they are family members here, has to have a system for holding each other accountable to what they say, the performance that they offer, the KPIs they're supposed to hit, the projects closing on the right date or whatever. Now we're going to combine that with it's a restaurant. Okay. So I don't know if you worked in a restaurant. I worked in a restaurant in my 20s, and as a teenager, I was a bartender, and all the, there's this kind of fun hustle vibe and this connection with the team that naturally happens in a restaurant. And so the manager usually will swing from one side to the other of wanting to be liked or being too controlling. And the reality is you got to be both. So there are times where being harsh and firm and holding accountability have value. And there are times where being understanding, caring have value. And what it seems like most managers do is they fall on one side or the other of this instead of moving based on the situation. So let's take an easy one. Somebody shows up late for work. That is a clear, talked about, we have an established protocol. You are late. So we go through there's accountability. Accountability doesn't have to look like a complete write-up. It doesn't mean to be a public reprimand. It doesn't need those things. It can be a pull them aside. Hey, I noticed you were late. Everything okay? Yeah, I got stuck in traffic. Understood. Let's not make it a habit. It's the first time it's happened. No big deal. But we talked to them. We created some accountability. Next day, they show up late again. Hey, right away. Hey, I noticed that you're late again. What's going on? Yeah, traffic's really rough. Okay. You're at a choice here. Are we seeing other habits that are feeding into this? Is this the only thing that they're not being accountable with? Are they a brand new employee? Like, there's a whole lot of factors we got to come into or weigh. But let's say this is the only thing that they're doing sideways. And the second time we're going, okay, so I'm beginning to notice a little bit of a pattern 2 days in a row. Can you solve this? Is this a solvable thing? And they're like, yes, I just got to leave a little bit earlier. Okay, can I count on you to be able to leave a little bit earlier so that this doesn't show up anymore? Okay, it's a little bit of a stronger conversation is where I take that one if this was the only thing we're dealing with. And if their response is absolutely, I'm going to get it straight. Now we got some accountability and we're talking about it. Third time, they do it again. Next day, they're late again. I'm writing them up. We're going to write up. We're escalating it appropriately. If we're starting to, and then we got 4, 5th, 6th, some people let this go 20 times and they're not doing anything. I think accountability gets tougher is when we don't have something that's like clear, like being on time or not. That's clear and established. So if we're talking about like have a good attitude that has perception to it, has a situation, we've got to, instead of I ate food off your plate, instead I brought you the plate and I set it down and the client was rude to me. They were like, they said something rude and then I turn around and I'm going, and I say something rude back. And now I feel justified and I need to defend myself. Maybe it triggered me a little bit and all these things are going on. And now we have a conversation with them about attitude and how they respond to things and all of that. And they're not completely bought into that. And so when we start getting into these gray areas, it becomes much more conversational. It needs to be much more about what have we witnessed and seen, and that we have real data points, so to speak, from being able to observe it. And we're coaching and we're working with them. Anyway,
well, and that one's an interesting one as far as like perspective, because the tardiness is black and white, but especially in a kitchen environment, cleanliness is a big one that I've dealt with in managing kitchens, where it's like, okay, well, obviously that's not clean, and their response is, "What are you talking about? That's super clean. That's cleaner than it was when I got here."
Right.
It's like, yeah, but it's not meeting the expectations that we have set. But if you don't have the ability to point on the wall and say that's the expectation, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be this difference of opinion. Like, well, you say it's clean, I say it is, and that's just that's how I clean it. So get over it.
Right.
So finding those, documenting, and I think someone even commented on this thread where they were like, processes are king, especially like in this environment of a restaurant, where if you can point back to, well, did you do this process to clean? And they say yes or no, that can easily dictate where the conversation goes, rather than it just being about like, well, I think it's not, I feel that it's not clean, you feel that it is clean. Then there's an impasse and it's hard to move on from there unless you go the autocratic mode and just put your foot down. Like, well, do it again.
Yeah. I'm curious how long they've been in business, because as a small company, a mom and pop, a lot of times there's a standard that when you start the business, there's an assumed standard. And then as you bring different employees and team members in, all of a sudden you realize what your standard is through people who do not do certain things.
Well, they do say that they have employees that have been with them for like 30 years. And so that's also part of the issue of like putting in a formal accountability system and getting those tenured employees to move into that system rather than just like doing what they've always done.
So they have bad habits.
That's kind of what it translates when I read it. Yeah.
It's also the relationship that they have with their manager, because if you've got a good relationship, the manager can go, hey, come on, man, this is where I got to get it to. And they're like, it is clean. And you're like, okay, it's not clean. Here's why it's not clean. You know, it's not clean. You can talk to them like that. But if it's somebody that the trust isn't there and there's this gap that's going on, then you have to handle it a little bit differently. But what I see most often, it's not this complicated. Most often it is something's going on. It's not being addressed. Mm-hmm. And so we all of a sudden that day, maybe it's a bigger issue, or maybe we got to, as a manager, we're just like hyper focused on, man, somebody's got to do something right. We get focused on something finally, and yet we don't reinforce it. We're not focused on it the next day or the next day. It's consistency. It is a standard. If you're going to create accountability, it can't be a one-time thing. And when you're creating accountability and you go, I love your example of this is clean or not clean. If the standard has been wherever it is, and all of a sudden you're moving the standard and you just expect them to react and respond because you decided, it doesn't work. Most people, if they know what the standard is before going into it, they're shooting for that standard. Mm-hmm. And if they're not hitting the standard and they know what the standard is, then there's probably a different issue that's going on. There's an attitude issue. There's all these, they're disgruntled. There's something that happened. Like there's usually an ulterior thing that's going on. Mm-hmm. For me, if I'm that person, right, you've got this 30-year-old company, you've got all this, whatever's going on, and I want to change the accountability level. I sit down and I have a meeting and I go, hey, we're going to change the accountability level. Yeah. And we're going to be creating standards for each thing that's coming up. And as they do, we're going to create a standard. As we create the standard, it's our job to hit the standard. We're going to work with you, but we need the effort on your side. And you kind of tell them it's coming.
Yeah. And what I love about that is it's twofold, because the first thing, it gives the why behind the accountability. And that's kind of what you're saying, where it's like, well, if you don't explain why it's important to get this to this next level of cleanliness, then they're never going to care. But the second part is it also holds management accountable to the changes. So if you get up there and tell people that change is coming and standards are going to be upheld, and then the management doesn't hold themselves accountable, kind of what you said at the top of this. Right. So it's that twofold where you're making yourself a little vulnerable as a management team. But if that's what that shouldn't be an issue, because that's what you are wanting anyway.
To your point, that's exactly it, right? If I want to hold people accountability doesn't happen holding someone accountable. That's what I was saying earlier and I never finished the thought. You don't hold somebody accountable. I hold myself accountable to following through. And a manager has choices. They can either encourage and help them be accountable by pointing it out, or they can discipline them for not being accountable. But accountability is me. It's not you holding me. Yeah, that won't work. And especially in a restaurant, you got all these people all over the place. There's no way a manager is sitting and looking over your shoulder the whole time.
And that's what they kind of talk about, like having to fight and do things throughout the day. Like, how is this even possible? So what were we going to say?
Well, someone I was just talking to right before this podcast said, we were talking about accountability, and he said, whatever is not addressed is blessed. And it just hit me, right? Because the standard becomes the standard. So whatever we don't address is blessed. Yeah. And then if there's not consistency and Joe does it, and now Bobby goes to do it, and Joe isn't called on it, but Bobby is, you have to have this level of consistency and also creating buy-in. So if you sit down with your team and say, we need to raise this level of accountability or the standard. So what does that look like? And the more you get people bought in to it and you make it fun, but it's not happening to them, it's happening for us, and we want to raise it together. You'll get something different. There's a book out there called Why Employees Don't Do What They're Supposed to Do and What to Do About It by Ferdinand Fordnese. And
amazing
one of
title.
them,
F40s,
right?
F40, 3 Fs for
FFF,
his name.
right?
Triple F.
But they think they're doing it. They don't know what to do. They don't know why they should do it. And so it goes through these 10 different things. But a lot of times people think they're doing it or they don't know what or why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Love it. Accountability, man. It's the best. It's the best when you you feel like you arrive. I don't know if you ever arrive, but
though, in regards to accountability, bringing this in even deeper is why it's so scary. Why is it so scary for people to hold that standard? And hearing twice in a row, they're so nice, they're so afraid that they're going to rock the boat or they're going to make someone mad. And yet having a standard sets the bar for us to learn and grow. And it's when you take that piece out and say, no, we deserve to have a standard. How do we get better? How do we level? How do we become that 5-star, not just half-assing it? People deserve to know how to get better.
Yeah. And they respond to it most of the time.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
All right. We're moving on to 3553. I don't know how important the usernames are, but I think that's just how you do these.
I think after we answer these, you should tag them in the podcast and say, hey, we answered your question here. That'd be really cool.
I definitely will. Yeah. Cool. So this one says, how do I manage an overly emotional and interruptive employee without losing my sanity? So they say, I'm struggling with an employee who is, to put it bluntly, driving me up the wall. She interrupts conversations constantly, even when I'm in my office talking with someone else. She butts in on things that don't concern her and is overly emotional to the point of crying frequently. I feel like I can't say anything critical to her without derailing her emotionally for the rest of the day, which throws off productivity for everyone. They go through a little bit more detail about how they drive them nuts. But basically, the problem is the constant interruptions, emotional breakdown, and oversensitivity are taking a serious toll on my mental health. I'm dreading every interaction. I don't want to let her go, but I'm at my wit's end. How do I manage this without losing my mind or completely breaking her down? Has anyone dealt with a similar situation? Any advice would be much appreciated.
Send her to a counselor.
Hey guys, we got a company-wide therapist available. Brittany, you're the first up.
Oh my gosh.
You gotta be careful how you go that direction.
No.
Do you want me to take what do you think, man? Where would you go with this?
So there's so many different pieces to this puzzle. I was an emotional employee, and I remember.
Past tense.
Yeah, but not to where I would interrupt, but I'd have emotional breakdowns, and so there's lots and lots of levels going on. Okay, McGrath. If you can see him,
Eric is violently shaking his head.
He's shaking his head. Yes. So I think about the people I've known that have been very emotional, where you give them feedback, whether it's positive, whether it's for improvement, they lose it, they cry. I actually had a manager hand me a Kleenex box in my chair, just hand me the Kleenex box and let me cry. But underneath it, there's other things. So for me, it'd be asking a lot of questions, understanding what they need. There is some type of need that is not being met. There's fear. For me, I would be building the relationship into what's going on deeper. I keep lots of Kleenex boxes. I'd also do assessments, like, part of understanding their personality. And
let me add too, because that's
I'm like, wow.
So
I could half of it I could handle. The other half would be like, come on, I just want to choke you out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what they're asking, how to not do that.
So to Mary's point, you don't. It sounds like they don't know what's going on.
Who's that? The manager or the employee?
The manager. Like, all these things are happening. I've got a valuable employee, but I'm having emotional And is it triggers? Is it what's going on? Is it fear? Whatever's happening there. And so
then it just seems erratic and uncontrollable.
Yes. So the fact that so we need to have a conversation about what's happening, but not while it's happening. So, it's like Monday morning, I'm coming in and I'm going to go, hey, we're going to have a meeting on Monday and I want to get to know you better. I want to understand how we can work better together. And it's everything Mary's saying is that conversation before the situation happens about how do we communicate better. So I would go, hey, I can't help but notice when we talk, sometimes you're interrupting, sometimes you're crying, sometimes there's all these things that are going on. And I want to learn. I want to understand. I want to make it so we're the most productive and can work well together. And I got to tell you, for me, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in some ways because I don't want to create negativity for you. And I still feel like I'm failing. So I was hoping you might take a little bit and teach me how to do this better. What are you experiencing? What's going on? I don't know what you're going to get in that conversation. And more than likely, they don't know either. They don't know how to manage it. But what it does is it brings awareness to it. And then you start looking for solutions. Okay, so when this stuff's happening, when you're interrupting the meetings that I'm in, I get maybe they're high AD. I work with a client that is extreme high ADHD, extreme high
ADD.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
And you go and I'll go to finish the sentence. I don't get to finish the sentence. They come in over the top every single time. Drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So when they do, I had this conversation with them. I said, okay, this is what's going on. How do I handle this? And I don't want to shut you down, but at the same time, it's shutting me down. How do we do this?
Yeah.
And her response was, she goes, well, when it's happening, let me finish what I'm saying, but then you gotta let me know that it's happening. She goes,
that's what I was going to say. Most often, in the case of the interruptions, they're not. They don't even understand that that's happening, and they don't understand how much it's affecting you emotionally and mentally and driving you up the wall. Because if you're emotionally intelligent, you can keep it together and not just blow up on them. And so, letting them in, letting them peek behind the curtain and be like, "Hey, no, this is driving me insane. Please stop."
Right.
Well, and they're probably getting the same thing at home, though. And a lot of times what I've seen at work is that work becomes their safe place, because usually at work, you don't go and attack the person like sometimes what happens at home. And so there's a different value system and they're not aware. But if they're if they're given the feedback, now it's triggering different emotions underneath. And I've seen so many people who, if they can't control the emotion, it gets worse when they go to control it. So even bring that awareness and just say, hey, Brittany, when I'm in a meeting, I'm just going to ask that the door, and maybe you shut the door and teach her, right? So, and I'm just making up the name Brittany because there's Brittany's out there.
I threw it out earlier. So hopefully it's very far from that. And it's Britannia.
You're constantly teaching the person. So if it happens again, it's not just one and done. How many times you teach? How many times, the children, you think about as a child when they're learning something, you teach them over and over and over and over, but there's consequences, and it's pain and pleasure, right? That's where we change our behavior. So if you're working with this person, give them the feedback and let them know, hey, I know this is a pattern, and do I have permission to help interrupt this pattern? So when it happens again, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to pause. We're going to shut the door. And it's not to attack you. And so the way you handle it can help them and alleviate, not that they're a failure and like, here I go again. So you're teaching them in a way. They still might be crushing on themselves, but then you pull them back in. How you doing? Like, what's going on?
And I would do this the same with, because we've really settled in on the interrupting, but there's also a piece where they talk about she butts into other people's projects or other people's work as well. And so, but I think it all falls into the same line of action where having a sit down meeting and being like, these are the trends that I'm seeing. Are you aware of that? If so, how can we work on adjusting that?
I can tell you, when you start getting into other people and she's cutting in and all that's going on, there's a bigger thing that's going on that's going to be real hard to break. It just is. So, because it's happening all over the place. And then you've got emotional outbursts that are happening over the top of it.
Yeah.
So it's
nice
like,
little
so there's got to be enough trust between them that she can get coached and get help to be able to. And if there's not, and she's just kind of like stonewalling it and like, this is the way it is, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not. You're either going to have to tolerate it, or you're going to have to let her go, or something along those lines. What we also don't know, though, is the manager overly non-emotional? And
that's interesting.
You know,
that's interesting.
So what if the majority of the team, let's say it's an accounting group that deals in numbers and they're maybe not as emotional, and you just brought somebody in that's like a normal human being, but they're now in accounting, and we just don't know how to deal with it because the culture is so non-emotional. So I don't know the full spectrum of what we're dealing with, but
and I've
having
seen
the
people
conversation helps.
And I've seen people like that. So we talk about the inner metrics, and their value is high altruist. And that high altruist, they want to help. So they might not be highly emotional intelligent. And at the same time, they just want to help. So they think that they have information that could help someone, and they just want to get it out because they need to be needed, valued. And if they're not getting that, like, we don't know, there's a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
So it's asking.
There's tools to figure those things out. Yeah.
You know, the Crucial Conversations, I always forget the author, but it talks about what we're talking about. Connor, if you'll drop that in somewhere while we're doing this or something so that people have that. But Crucial Conversations talks about and gives you kind of how to have the conversation before the conversation. So you're not having this emotional conversation. It kind of walks you through that. A great book, just really good conversation book anyway.
It's 4 different authors, so maybe that's why you can't remember it.
I have
Patterson, Greeny, McMillan, and Switzerland.
Yeah, Switzerland wrote that. Just kidding. I don't. Anyway,
we'll figure it out. We'll put it in.
Yeah.
I don't know. We said the name. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, and most people don't want to be a disruptor or disruption. Most people, somebody like that, my assumption would be that if she actually knew what was truly happening or how upset and how frustrated people were, she would want to know that and have tools to change. Yeah. You would hope. She's not going to go on a purpose like, hey, I'm going to disrupt you today.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard habit to break. Hard one.
Yeah.
Do we have more of these, or is that it?
Yeah, we got one more.
Okay, let's do it.
One more. Big title. I'm not even going to, I don't know. The username is Xylanine with an X 999 new. So I don't know. Who cares?
Sounds like a normal username. Yeah.
Title is Cognitive Dissonance Within the Team. So got a document from my team leader, the department head, today, full of ideas about how he wants the team to behave and grow. It's full of nice sounding things about understanding, empathy, and cooperation. The thing is, the team, in quotes, rather fails to meet the objective definition of a team. We all have separate, unconnected objectives with different clients and deadlines. The only common point is making money for the organization and upholding the regulatory requirements we work toward. Otherwise, it's a set of different people who share space, equipment, and cost code for overheads, and who pull one another down like a bucket of crabs in the event of a resource conflict. I've never heard of that, like a bucket of crabs, but sure, maybe they're based in New England. Any suggestions on bridging the cognitive dissonance?
So you get the bucket of crabs thing, right? So if you put crabs in a bucket, if one goes to crawl out, the others that are down below pull it back in.
Pull them out.
Oh, no, I've never heard that. What?
I actually saw that when we were in North Carolina. We were fishing for crabs, fishing for crabs. And we put all these crabs in the bucket, and one was crawling up, and I'd always heard that term. And these crabs were pulling the one out back into the water. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing it really is happening.
Yeah.
No, I'm not around that many crabs, so I've never heard it. Maybe in South Louisiana, it's like a bucket of crawfish. I've heard that term.
Yeah. Well,
no, I'm joking. No, I've never. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So whenever there's a resource conflict, they just pull each other back into the problem. So
yeah, they're not. Somebody's getting away. They're like, oh no, hell no, you're not taking my resources. They pull it back down.
Yeah.
So all right, so we got a group of people that just have their own kind of agenda and things that they're dealing with, and they're different than each other.
Well, and I will say that the perspective of this individual who's writing this is, it doesn't sound overtly positive about the environment.
It doesn't sound like they're excited about it. And for those listening, cognitive dissonance, I actually looked up the definition to just make sure we're talking about, is Perfect. A psychological state of discomfort that occurs when someone holds conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. So they just see things differently is where they're coming from.
Different people on the team, specifically this team leader who they're working toward understanding and empathy and cooperation. And the person who submitted this is like, well, why should we do that? So that's the cognitive dissonance of where to go.
Mayor, I don't know where you're thinking, but for me, this is where the ability to have empathy and to have the emotional intelligence to see the other person's perspective and to be able to work in an environment, no matter how different it is. They're competing over similar resources, which is somehow making money for the company, and they're doing that, but they're in different spaces. But
which I think, by the way, to paint the right picture, like for me, when I first read it, I was like, I don't even know what kind of company this would be, but this could easily be a home services company that has like plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. You're all working within different scopes completely, but you're all working towards the betterment of the company, like the overarching company. So this could easily be that kind of situation or scenario.
But that to your point, I mean, let's make it a service-based business, and you got plumbing, you got solar, and you got heating and air, right? Yeah. Three completely different businesses that a lot of times are brought under the same roof. And then they're competing because there's only so much money to invest, advertising, all those things. You're competing with similar resources. But we're coming back down to human dynamics and the ability. So if there is a plan, if there are budgets to work from, if there are a set of standards to work from, now we've got the human element that's factored into this. And is the culture pitting us against each other, or are we supporting each other and working with it? Am I looking for a perspective that is understanding and empathetic, or am I just in a me mindset and I'm about me and my group and whatever's going on, right? So and then you go back, to me, that's a heavy leadership issue. So leadership could easily be coming in and bridging the gaps here and going, I hear where you're coming from. However, we got to take into account and teaching them the broader perspective. But it almost sounds like they're feeding into, you need to be about me here and competing for yourself, because in some way they're thinking that makes it better. Hard to answer without actually seeing what's going on.
Yeah, but we have to make some assumptions, but yeah.
But to me, it's as simple as, where are you coming from? Are you coming about me and my turf? And is that the culture, or is it a culture about we and we're accomplishing this goal for the organization? And that tone is sent by the managers and the leaders of that group. And so if management and leadership aren't going to set that tone, you're not going to be able to get there if you're not a manager or a leader, because you don't have the influence.
Well, and are they clear on the vision? Because a lot of times so yes, the leadership, right? Here's the vision. Do your people know the vision? Do they know what's required? And a lot of times we did a process years ago, it was called Give and Gets. And walked into, it was actually service-based companies, and there was some of this happening. And it was, what is the objective? What is the vision, the goals for this year? Leadership got really, really clear. This is what we're doing. But the team didn't know that. They were just, their head was down. They were doing their job, and then they would get mad. Well, so-and-so isn't doing this for me, and so-and-so took this over. And so we got them really clear on what's the overarching goal? What's the vision for this year? What are you doing? What do you do personally that's going to bring this to life? What do you need from another person or another department to help you be successful? The dialogue that happened within that team, actually we did it multiple times, was amazing, because it goes into assumptions. People didn't know. They had no idea what the overarching theme was. They just knew they were supposed to do this job, but they didn't know how it impacted everyone.
I mean, yeah, it goes back to that very first one with the kitchen, and you can't expect to roll out new processes and procedures in the hopes of increasing standard if you don't set that precedent with the team. And that's kind of, the more I read this one and look at it, specifically because of the first sentence of like, I got a document from my team leader. So this is some sort of initiative coming down from the top which sounds like there was some change at the top where they're recognizing that, hey, all the departments are independent, they're not connected. We need they're working towards improving the culture. But if there was that misstep of not communicating that to the rest of the team, then of course you're going to get this and be like, well, I mean, this isn't how we are. This isn't going to work. But that's the reason you got the document. So it's this, double-edged sword where you have to address it and then put the action in place at the same time.
A lot of times there's assumptions that happen. So it gets rolled out. And we do this exercise called chairs, where someone has the vision. And then there's this person who is the conduit. And there's other people who have pieces of it, but nobody has all of the information except for one person. And the assumptions that happen. So you get this document. The assumption is everyone knows what we're doing. But down the road or down the line, they don't. And so it goes back into the leadership, the manager. They have to be clear on the expectation. Sit down with people, sit down with the team, have conversation. A lot of times I've seen this, they have great intentions and there's all these assumptions, but people don't understand what is required.
Yeah. So I'll go comment on this one and be like, hey, show this episode to your leadership.
We'll see how that goes. I personally feel like all these, it all comes back to, are you going to have a healthy, robust, conflict-oriented conversation and do it in a healthy way? And when you do, you're going to start getting different answers. It doesn't mean it's all solved. It's just, but either you're not having the conversation, you're not having a healthy conversation, you're not asking questions, you're being overly directive. Like it comes down, a lot of things get solved when we start being willing to step in and create healthy dialogue, healthy conflict, and go after it. And at a minimum, we start to get different answers.
And that informs quite a bit the direction. Yeah, it was a beautiful little theme for today's episode on these. Have the conversation. Jeez.
Healthy conflict. What are you doing?
Suck
it up.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, if we had these people on the show, which that's another way to go, we could reach out to them.
Interesting.
That'd be interesting. But usually what they say is when you go, hey, have the healthy conversation, they usually say, we are having it. They say we are having the conversation. And then it comes down to the skill to navigate that conversation on both sides. And I got to tell you, even when people say they have the skill, I rarely see people that have the skill. Because you're literally running into a landmine, a landmine field, and you've got to pay attention to: are you stepping on a landmine? Are you not? Am I triggering them?
What happens when you do step on a landmine?
Yeah, and we stepped on one. Can we actually work out of this together? Do we have enough trust to get there? Can I create trust from this conversation? Like, there is so much going on. And we teach this stuff and we screw it up as much as we get it right, and we know what we're doing. So when you get into these, they're hard. That's why a lot of people don't have the conversation, because they're just hard conversations.
Well, and I think about conflict,
it doesn't go well, and then it's like, well, just give up.
Well, and I think about conflict, and what we're talking about is that conflict happens when someone's need is not being met. So obviously the people who are writing in, they have a need that's not being met. So going back into the healthy conversation, what need isn't being met? And they probably, whether it's information, the clarity, the why, like just to be listened to, something's happening, have the conversation.
There you go.
Good stuff.
Alrighty. Well, thanks for joining me today, guys. This was fantastic. I love these. And thank you, listener, for listening.
Listeners. Listeners.
We got to talk to them directly. Thank you, listener, for all you do. And you can reach out to us directly. Submit your own stories. Submit your own question. Get our advice. podcast@drivenleadership.com. And until then, we will see you all next week.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.